The bread of life is that which comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. There's a time in our lectionary cycle, in the schedule of readings that we observe on Sunday mornings in Anglican churches and many other churches across Canada and around the world. And every 3 years, we have a very long segment of Sunday readings that all come from the same chapter of John. It's John 6, and sometimes they're called the Bread Sundays. And it's always a challenge for me to preach on those Sundays because, well, once you've preached one sermon about bread, it's hard to really come up with 5 more. But then again, this passage from John 6 comes up every couple of years at Thanksgiving. So this passage that we just heard is the passage that many people will be reading together on Sunday at Harvest Thanksgiving services. And it's a beautiful passage that if we were to read all of John 6, we would start off with Jesus feeding the multitudes. You know, when the thousands of people are there to hear Jesus, it's getting late in the day, and the disciples say, we need to send them home so that they can get something to eat. And Jesus tells his disciples, well, you give them something to eat. And then that mysterious and wondrous episode occurs where Jesus feeds the thousands that are there assembled to be part of his ministry and to hear what he has to say. But what we just heard comes right after that. They leave that place, and Jesus is alone with his closest followers, his disciples, and we get to listen in on a private exchange of what's happening between them. And here's where it gets really interesting, where the disciples seem impressed, and Jesus tells them that, well, the physical bread is temporary. That comes and goes, but there's something that's more important. And it's that something more important that I want to talk about today. It's always before us that Jesus is for us the bread of life. That's what we celebrate at Holy Communion. That's what we celebrate when we gather in celebration together at Thanksgiving. And we have this way of counting our blessings, you know, giving thanks for that which we have. But I think in the minds of many of us is that question, what about the people that do not have as much? Or what happens when we don't have? What are we giving thanks for? And so today I would like to hear a little bit more about what it means to experience God, to experience Christ as bread. And when I think of bread, I don't know, did any of you get caught up in the home baking excitement of the early days of COVID-19? Yeah, I see Suzanne has the thumbs up. I know I did. I've always enjoyed baking bread at home, but with the extra time, I was able to do it a little bit more. And I think most people understand that the way that our homes, the way that our economy is set up, you really don't save any money at all if you're baking your own bread. It's never been about economy. It's about the experience of the bread, the experience of putting a lot of work into something and then being able to share it with those around us, and to be able to actually experience the results of our own hard work. Bread is something that we can't really do alone. Maybe it's possible to plant a field of wheat and to harvest it yourself, and to prepare the grain, and then to mill it, and then to bake it, and then to serve it and eat it. But I don't know if anybody does all of that alone as an individual. Bread is something that really is the experience of a community. There are farmers, there are millers, there are bakers, there are people who sell bread, there are people who serve it, there are those who will, and everybody eats it at some point in the process. But it's not something that one person does alone. It's really become a sign of community that we are able to enjoy bread. And so when Jesus is talking about bread, I don't think that he's talking about something that is entirely between God and the individual person. It's something that's so much more inclusive than that. It's something that involves a community. And then when we look at, there's this one part of the reading that Kame just read, where it speaks of Jesus as bread. Jesus is introducing this idea that he is the bread of life, the bread from God. And he says something that's very interesting. He says that upon him, the Father has placed his seal. And to me, that is a very important word, seal. Often I think of the seal of approval, you know, when you're doing some sort of bureaucratic form and you get that stamp to say that it's been accepted. That's great. Maybe even a wax seal. But in this case, it's something different, and it points to the challenge that comes with being bread, the challenge that comes with being a minister of Christ. During the Roman occupation of these territories that included the homeland of Jesus, bread was very strictly regulated and very severely taxed. And so any bread that was made outside of the home was required to be properly documented. And of course, there was a very hefty taxation campaign that would make sure that the people who lived in Palestine at that time remembered under whose rule they lived. And so, of course, any bread that was bought in the marketplace was sealed with a seal of the emperor. And so every time a family would bring home bread to eat in their home, they would be reminded that what they have is at the discretion of the empire. And of course, people absolutely despised this. It was yet one more reminder of how they were an oppressed people, a people under foreign occupation, and a people that was constantly paying taxes to allow a foreign government to oppress them further. So when Jesus says that a seal is placed upon him, as he's calling himself bread, he's talking about something entirely different. He's setting up a parallel or even counter reality, where instead of living under the authority of this empire, we are able to live under the authority of God. And so when Jesus is multiplying the loaves and the fishes, when we see, however we want to interpret it or however we want to explain it, we see an abundance of bread. And well, the way the story is told, it sounds like it's not quite falling within the expectations of the bread taxes of that day. It's entirely countercultural and subversive. That this symbol of community cooperation could be reinterpreted as something that brings life rather than a symbol of oppression is really a remarkable thing that Jesus is telling us. Now, we don't live under Roman occupation, but we do live with a certain amount of empire. Today, as every day, we are exposed to the expectations of commercialism and consumerism, of the empires of this day, which are often corporate, but often governmental. And we are constantly reminded of the oppression of others. The most vulnerable among us are the ones that fall by the wayside as collateral damage of an empire that's been set up to serve the powerful. And so when Jesus introduces himself as bread from heaven, which brings life, it isn't simply a declaration, but it's an invitation. And one of the things that I love most about the Primates World Relief and Development Fund is that it is all about community. It's about relationships, a network of partners around the world that cooperate in a very messy and, well, sometimes it takes longer than to respond to crises than some other organizations. But it has that holding power because we're able to do it together as community. Just as we're so unlikely and probably would be extremely inefficient if I were to try to grow my own wheat and then prepare it for milling and then mill it myself and bake it myself, it would be really so self-serving. I would be the only one eating it, or maybe those closest to me. It would be actually quite a wasteful practice. Instead, we do things differently. We participate in the community efforts of caring for our world together. And sometimes we are in need, and sometimes we are in a position to offer what we have to those around us. So as we prepare for Thanksgiving, as we prepare for this feast that is often marked with an abundance of food and an abundance of decorations and Thanksgiving for so many material things, if you have bread on the table this weekend, remember that it is a symbol of that which we can be together in Jesus Christ as people of faith, and even more generally and more inclusively as members of the household of humanity. What we have because it has been shared. And it is our opportunity to be the bread of life, to take part in this ministry of Christ that brings our world together. And for that invitation, I am extremely thankful and excited. Faith is a subversive and dangerous instrument. And I pray that it can be put to use in the fields of reconciliation, in the fields of grace, and that it may be used to serve at the table of God this day and always. Amen.